Hi, welcome to Someone Else's Movie, the podcast where an actor, writer, director, or nebulous industry figure gives a little love to a movie they didn't make. I'm Norm Wilner, senior film writer for Now Magazine, and this is The Other Thing I Do. My guests this week are Adrianna DiLonardo and Sarah Rotella, the writer and director, respectively, of Almost Adults, which had its world premiere last May at the Inside Out Film Festival in Toronto and launches today on VOD platforms worldwide. It's a sweet little comedy about two young women dealing with some stuff, and it bears almost no relation to the movie they chose to talk about here. Adrianna and Sarah picked Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings trilogy, the colossal three-film adaptation of J.R.R. Tolkien's fantasy epic starring Elijah Wood, Sean Astin, Ian McKellen, Viggo Mortensen, Orlando Bloom, Andy Serkis, Liv Tyler, Hugo Weaving, and roughly half the population of New Zealand. Released every December from 2001 to 2003, the cycle culminated in The Return of the King, winning 11 Oscars, including Best Picture, Best Director, and Best Adapted Screenplay. In fact, The Return of the King was the film they initially picked, but of course we ended up talking about the entire trilogy, and that other, more recent venture to Middle-earth as well. You know, the one that really didn't have to be a trilogy? Yeah. This is someone else's movie.
We won't talk about The Hobbit.
We can if you want to.
Oh, no, I don't want to talk about
I never saw the last one. Did you see the last one?
Yeah, I saw all of them.
Oh, okay.
But I don't want to talk about it.
All right, well, for the purposes of the podcast, which I think is probably already rolling, I just want you guys to just start off by introducing yourselves, and then we can go from there.
Sure. My name's Adrianna DiLonardo, and I'm the writer of Almost Adults.
And I'm Sarah Rotella. I'm the director of Almost Adults.
And you guys picked the third Lord of the Rings movie, The Return of the King.
We can briefly talk about all of them, because I think it's one story.
It's going to happen.
Yeah.
But what was why start at the end? I mean, why was that the one that you guys picked?
Personally, I think actually my favorite of all the Lord of the Ring movies is The Fellowship of the Ring. But, you know, with all of the amazing critical acclaim that Return of the King got, and it's also a fantastic movie, and it has like some of my favorite moments out of the whole trilogy. Yeah. So I felt like that was probably the best one to talk about.
And I don't know how you can get out of Return of the King without like bawling.
Yeah.
Fellowship, I'm like I can keep it together, but not Return of the King.
So it's the more emotional choice.
Yeah.
Okay. It's funny. I remember, this is to set up the context of it. I got some of the angriest hate mail I've ever received as a critic or a writer at all for suggesting that maybe it could have been two movies. 2 4-hour films, that you could shave an hour out of the Two Towers and that it would still function and have all the emotional impact. So clearly the Lord of the Rings movies are a bit of a sensitive spot for me. But also I've had, 15 years to digest that and move on, and I'm okay with it, and people can have the opinions they want to have, and it can be 3 movies. Yeah. It's all right. I mean, clearly it wasn't a problem for anybody else. But I'm also older, so when did you guys come to it? What was your first experience of it?
I originally read the books when I was around 12, 13 years old.
But you have to tell the story of how you got the books.
Yeah, so I was babysitting my parents' friends' kids. So my parents and their friends went out to dinner, and I babysat. And instead of giving me money, they gave me the Lord of the Rings box set of the books. And I was like, I didn't know what it was. And but I was really into like comics at the time, and they're like, oh, these books are great. They're like fantasy. We really think you'd like them. And I was like, okay. So I read them and I loved them. And then it was a few years later that the films came out, and I was so excited. So I went to like every single premiere, the midnight premiere when they were still doing those, and I would go into school the next day super tired, but I didn't care because I was on a Lord of the Ring high. So that's how I came about the films. I was in high school though when the films came out, all 3 of them.
Yeah. And I'm the total opposite because I hadn't read the books. I didn't even know of the books. When I was in like elementary school, I read all the Chronicles of Narnia books.
Sure.
So I was more kind of in the Lewis side of it. But then my friend, when Fellowship came out, he was like, I really want to see this movie. Like, he had read the books. He was really excited. And I was like, sure, it sounds interesting. I'll go. No idea what I was in for. And I remember seeing the Fellowship and being like, this is so, like, probably grade 9. I'm like, this is so cool. Like, I love this. And then by the time Return of the King came out, I think we were both in grade 12. So it was like end of high school. But kind of, yeah.
That's something that I've been thinking about. The Harry Potter movies sort of brought it into relief. It's like you're a different generation by the time it's over. If you started in 2001, which is the same year that the Fellowship came out, you could grow for the entire cycle of those movies and be an adult when it's over if you were the right age when you started. With Lord of the Rings, it's more compressed. But that's also, that window from grade 9 to grade 12 is pretty drastic for maturation, for figuring out who you are. And so, yeah, you basically took the journey. Like, you guys were
it
exactly
almost
the right
felt
age.
like, you were just, like, growing with these characters. Like, when you start high school, too, you're like, I'm like Frodo and everything is great. And then you end high school and you're just, like, destroyed Frodo that just wants to leave.
So, okay. So was it ritualistic, each one? Did you make sure that you, like, clear your entire schedule to go see it and block off the day? Was there...
It was like a countdown. Like, I was pretty obsessed. Yeah, it would be like... I think I saw each film at least 2 to 3 times in theaters when it came out. And like I said, I went to the midnight premiere, and I went to each one with someone different. Someone that was equally as obsessed with the films as I was. Because I didn't want someone that was going to be like, this is boring, I don't want to wait 6 hours in line to see Lord of the Rings. Like, it was like, we made a whole day of it. It was like a countdown, and it was a countdown until it was released on home entertainment, like...
And that took time back in those
Back in those days, it would be like 8 months later. It wasn't like...
Yeah, it was like August, right? July or August.
It's like watching it for the first time again.
It is, yeah.
And I think it's still, I mean, blocking off time for the movies, like, it's still like that now for us, because in high school, you know, you just have school, but then you have time. You could go see the movie 5 times if you want. But last year we actually went to New York because they were doing a live orchestra accompaniment with all 3 Lord of the Rings movies. We were like, well, these 4 days we're off. Booking them off.
Howard Shore came out at the end. I was bawling. It was great.
He probably just saw everyone's, like, ugly face because everyone was crying, like, by the end of it.
Those poor musicians, their fingers must have been bloody. 9.5 hours.
Yeah, no, they broke it up, though. It was, they did 1 on Friday and then 2 on Saturday.
Good. I was afraid you were going to tell me, no, they was the extended version.
They extended all 3. They were chained.
It was 16 hours.
Yeah.
So have you seen the extended? I mean, which versions do you prefer? Before we even get into the movies themselves, this is the stuff that fascinates me because... like, I remember Peter Jackson being the weird New Zealand guy at TIFF who would bring these really fun monster movies. That's where I met him first. Yeah. And, you know, like, we're almost the same age, and he was sort of coming up as a filmmaker when I was coming up as a critic, and so we would run into each other every few years. I was at the Midnight Madness screening of Meet the Feebles, and then Brain Dead. That played like a rock concert. And then Heavenly Creatures, and you get this evolution going on. Yeah. And suddenly, he's made this. But he's also doing that weird thing that he always did where I want to fix it. I want to put more in. I want to make it long. Like the Frighteners being an extra 20 minutes or 25, I think. And then there's a 4.5 hour documentary on that. That was the Laserdisc that came out with it first. And I got that and thought, you're clearly, like, you can do literally anything you want. And this is what he wants to do. And then it was announced that he was doing The Lord of the Rings, and it was announced that he was doing the way he was doing them. Right. And then the running time thing became an issue, and then finally these longer cuts rolled out. So
like way longer cuts too.
I mean, Return of the King is another hour, isn't it?
It's Return of the King is 4 hours and like 24 minutes with the extended cut, which is 4 movies. Like, it's really crazy. That you can watch 3 hours of a movie and you're still like, I still have an hour 42 left.
Yeah. Do you prefer the extended cuts, or the?
I guess maybe because I'm just such a fan that I enjoy those extra moments that he puts in, because, like, and I'm a fan of the books, so, like, I did like all of those book moments, because he mainly added book moments into the extended versions. So, and maybe because I'm so biased because I just love it so much, I'm like, it could have been 8 hours and I would still love it and watch all of it.
Every scene from the book. Translated into
they have put every song in it.
Yeah, I mean, again, like, as a fan, like, I would agree with the extended versions, because why wouldn't you want those extra story moments? I could see if you're just a moviegoer and you're just, you know, want to see the movies, 4 hours per extended cut, or I think the first 2. I don't know.
I think it's 3.5
something.
For the first extended.
It's a commitment.
It really is. But his longer cuts breathe better. That's the thing that I find so weirdly fascinating.
Right.
I almost resent them because, and with the Hobbits, I actively resent them because I didn't like the movies and I don't want any more of them. But I kind of still want to give him the chance to, I love his work enough and I like him enough that I want to be proven wrong that maybe there is a good film in here.
Yeah.
But the Lord of the Rings, like the expanded cuts of those films, they still work in a way that the Hobbit films don't, because on some level the Hobbit movies just can't support the length. That we know it's a tiny little story and he's just expanded it beyond all reason. But with Lord of the Rings, as you say, there is stuff to put in. There's stuff that can be entertaining and restored. So which version, for the purposes of this podcast, which versions do you guys want to talk about for The Return of the King?
Like, do you want to talk about the extended?
Do you prefer? I mean, do you guys want it? Well, for the listener, really, is there one that you'd rather they see?
I think if they are a fan of Lord of the Rings, to see the extended.
Yeah.
And
they're shouting at you right now, where people walking around wearing headphones going, no! or yes.
It's interesting, too, when you watch the extended of Return of the King, because there's so many small scenes that are kind of weaved in between, where when...
Or just the scenes are extended, too.
Yeah, for sure, but sometimes he puts these, like, little tiny moments in a scene that already exists in the shorter cut that you're almost like, why did they take that out? Or how could they take that out? It still flows, but it seems like such a...
I would say to watch the extended too, because I think so much of Lord of the Rings is about falling in love with these characters, and it's like the journey that they go on, and all of the moments he does add, it's all mainly character development. He doesn't add like, oh, I'm going to add some more like action shots in it. But there are a few where it's like, I'm going to put in a head smash that we couldn't get in the theatrical version because then we'd be rated R.
Right.
But yeah, it's so much about these like characters that you really get more of a sense of them, I think, in the extended versions.
And you've made the investment by that point. I mean, you've been walking with them for 2 years by the time you get to the third one. That's the other thing that's really struck me as odd, is that I can't imagine binging on them, partially because of the length of time that it takes to do that, but also because these are like, you're supposed to walk away. You're supposed to come back later. I mean, it is all one movie and everything, but it felt more appropriate to sort of re-immerse myself in that world every December for 3 years rather than sit down and do it all at once. I mean, I wouldn't want to do it with the Harry Potter movies because the actors would age really fast and it would be creepy. But, with Lord of the Rings, they shot for 18 months. The whole thing is one shoot and one gargantuan epic shoot that never really ended. The week before the Return of the King opened, they brought... Monahan was off shooting Lost, although we didn't know that yet. They brought the other Hobbits in. So it was Elijah Wood, Andy Serkis, Billy Boyd. I think those are the only ones who were here. The three of them came through, and Serkis was telling us that he had just done motion cap for one other thing for Gollum 2 weeks earlier. So 3 weeks before the release of the film, in an era where you had to print films that you couldn't just throw it on a DCP and go. Jackson was still tweaking it, which is terrifying to me. Like, you have this gargantuan machine of a movie, and it isn't done when it's done. Plus the CG, plus everything else. And that brings us to Gollum and the level of technical complexity that's going on. But first, I wanted to pull back on something you said about the R rating being a thing and how the extended versions can restore stuff. That's the thing that I can't quite stop thinking about watching them again, is that Peter Jackson made like the most violent movies ever made, and they were fun and enjoyable. And what doesn't come through in Lord of the Rings is restraint. Like, he's still doing everything. He's just found a way to make it like PG-13 fun and epic, sweepy adventure. Yeah. But without, I guess you can kill as many orcs as you want.
I guess that's the thing. It's just like, as long as it's not like a human skull being crushed, then it's okay if it's this like fantastical orc. Because they're not real.
Yeah.
So.
Well, that's the thing, right? Now you can do it with, I think they've established it with all the supernatural action movies. If the blood isn't red, you can get away with it. It can be as black in the Hellboy movies as they want it to be. Right. Or yellow, and like colors are okay. But
that makes sense too, because in Lord of the Rings, all the orc blood is also like this really dark, almost like a purple, yeah.
It's just fun to say ochre. the whole world of those movies is so kind of remarkably ridiculous for the way they can keep straight faces in these these are real actors doing this, which is I think the key. But you do have Ian McKellen walking around going, "Oh, they have a cave troll," and it's delightful. You're just so happy. So this is the thing that the other thing about the Harry Potter movies and the Lord of the Rings movies is that now all of a sudden these films are gateways into the work of these this really serious cast. David Thewlis told a story about being worried that people are going to discover, the kids too young will discover Naked and Total Eclipse and all these very adult movies he's made because he was in the Harry Potter films. And with Lord of the Rings, you've got the body of Ian McKellen's work and Viggo Mortensen, who is, he's a Cronenberg regular. He's that guy. So was it your first exposure to those actors?
I think all of them except Sean Astin. And Liv Tyler.
Yeah.
And Cate Blanchett. No, I think even Cate Blanchett at the time. I don't think I saw her in anything else.
When did the first X-Men come out?
2000.
That's before, yeah. So Ian McKellen also.
Oh, that's
sure.
right. That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I saw the first one too. But I think most of them, though, I had never heard of really any of them. Even Elijah Wood was like a pretty big actor because he was like a child star.
He was the biggest name, I think, at the time.
Yeah.
And I don't think I saw him in anything.
I think I could see he was in a movie when he was younger with Christina Ricci. No, I really like Christina Ricci movies growing up, so that's why I know that Elijah Wood was in The Ice Storm. So I saw him in that.
Yeah, I was like Sean Astin and Rudy, and that was basically it.
Yeah.
Oh, maybe too, because we were kind of it was around grade 9, grade 10, so it was kind of younger.
I would have figured the Goonies, but I'm old.
I've never seen the Goonies. Maybe because I do not like horror films, and when I was younger, I thought everything was scary. Yeah. So the Goonies would have been too terrifying
really
for
scary.
me. Yeah.
And then did The Matrix come out before Lord of the Rings?
Yes.
The first one?
Yeah,
so
99.
Hugo Weaving also.
But yeah.
Yeah.
Sure.
So maybe
blonde elf Hugo Weaving. Hugo Weaving has had this fascinating career of just being the stern man in all of these movies, and he's great. He can do anything.
Yeah.
But it is kind of it's the giveaway now. That's they're shooting in Australia or New Zealand. That's
Hugo Weaving will be in it.
Like the Wolfman, where it's you didn't make that here.
I thought it was so interesting too that Lucy Lawless was supposed to play Galadriel, but she was pregnant at the time, and so she passed on it.
Yeah.
And I was like, that could have been a completely different movie.
Yeah, right. It really is. It's not wrong, but the energy would have been totally different.
100% different.
And somebody else dropped out too, right? Was it Mortensen, the last minute replacement for
Viggo Mortensen? Yeah. It was supposed to be someone Townsend.
It was
Stuart Townsend.
He was supposed to play it, but I can't remember if it was he wasn't the right fit, or they started shooting and they're like, no, this is not who Aragorn's supposed to be, and then they got Viggo in last minute, which is crazy because
commits. I mean, on a moment's notice, will you give up a year and a half of your life to go ride a horse?
Yeah,
and
learn how to sword fight and be the best sword fighter in that film.
And I knew him at the time, I think, basically from The Reflecting Skin, which was this obscure Philip Ridley movie that just got a re-release last year. But again, if you're a fan of The Lord of the Rings and you go and see this, he plays a GI in late 40s, early 50s America, dying of radiation poisoning and freaking out his younger brother. That's the movie.
Yeah.
But he's fantastic, and it's just I will watch him do anything. But then when I heard he was in The Lord of the Rings, it's that seems who else knows who he is? A handful, maybe outside of Hollywood or casting directors. It was just really great to see this. It's great to see Jackson giving actors this kind of exposure. I mean, Dominic Monaghan was virtually unknown, if not totally unknown.
Yeah,
right? His first feature film.
I think so. Yeah,
Billy Boyd's second, I think. And there's just all of this talent gathered, and they kind of went collectively crazy for it. They just all there's not a weak link. Even the tiny little roles like John Noble and Brad Dourif who show up for 5 minutes, or Sean Bean in his career-defining role, being the guy who gets killed.
He gets killed all the
time. It is you can look at it as an acting exercise, and most of it is these people are in ridiculous furs, and I think 2/3 of the population or the GDP of New Zealand was dedicated to producing costumes and tech and working on it.
And it hears every person you ask in New Zealand either worked on Lord of the Rings or knows someone very close to them that has worked on Lord of the Rings. It just took over that country.
And I remember when Return of the King was at the Academy Awards the year it won everything, and I remember Peter Jackson doing an interview and saying that how shocked he was that none of the cast was nominated, because it was a cast that connected to so many people that brought people to tears, like, night after night after night. And I remember...
Especially, I think, Viggo Mortensen and Sean Astin. I think it's crazy that they didn't get nominated.
Astin's an easier sell, even as a supporting actor. I think with Mortensen, is he the lead? He isn't really, because Frodo's clearly the lead, but at the same time, it's his story. It's that whole thing where, as with almost every big production, the actors, they're not irrelevant. Like, they're intensely relevant. They're the reason it connects, but... The tech categories get so caught up, I think, that people just forget that there are people in it, and they just buy into the characters. It's the same reason, like, Ford never got nominated for Raiders, or what's the most recent example of, like, an egregious oversight in an action movie that did really well? Ledger getting nominated for The Dark Knight and winning, but not Bale, who is actually carrying that film.
Yeah.
Right.
But Lord of the Rings, I don't know, maybe it is just some kind of... Was McKellen ever nominated for any of them? He wasn't, was he?
No. I don't think any... of them were not ever nominated.
Yeah, I don't think so. I think you're right. It's one of those things where they stop seeing the acting. I guess you just accept it.
They're just so believable as those characters that they're not even acting anymore.
I mean, certainly, I've seen McKellen turn into Gandalf in person, and it's amazing.
Yeah.
He slipped into character during the Hobbit press junket once. The first film was released, I went to New York for the junket because we put Martin Freeman on the cover of Now, and he just did this one little gesture where he said, "What if?" And it happened. It turned on and turned off, and 300 people in the room were just going, "That was cool." But he is it's a remarkable performance, and he is truly great in 2 or 3 scenes as opposed to really good. Just like the first moment where. The moment in Fellowship where I clicked into it was that moment where he looks at the ring, realizes that it's real, and just collapses physically, sort of shrinks before bucking up and realizing what's coming. That's such a great moment. I read that years and years earlier and thought, I guess you just ignore it. How would you even get a moment like that into a movie this big? And there it is. He found a way.
Yeah.
It is a shame that nobody got recognition. But, I think Peter Jackson is doomed to never be appreciated for... the things he wants are not the things that the mainstream wants, even though he made these gigantic movies, which are the definition of mainstream pop blockbuster entertainment. They're still weird and idiosyncratic and strange, and he used little people in long shots, and they're completely unconvincing, and nobody cares. It's just how he wanted to do it, and it's fine. And then for the Hobbit movies, he came up with these elaborate... He was really proud of this. These elaborate... double, I don't know how to describe it. They're sort of double matte shots, but they're digital opticals performed on 2 separate stages. So you can have hobbits, all the actors playing hobbits and dwarves are interacting in one scene. This is in the first Hobbit movie in Bilbo's table, that big dishwashing scene.
Right.
And Ian McKellen is on a separate set interacting with his own stuff. And the 2 of them were shot live and merged together in a hard drive. Interesting.
I saw an interview with Ian McKellen, and he was talking about how when he was filming The Hobbit, he mainly acted to a tennis ball. He wasn't acting to anyone, and it made him he was very emotional during the interview because he said the reason he got into acting is because he likes he was mainly a theater actor before, and he likes acting with other actors, as I'm sure most actors do. And he said it was very isolating and very lonely doing that, and he almost broke down during the interview because it was so upsetting for him. And so I watched all this behind the scenes and special features for all the Lord of the Ring movies, but I haven't for The Hobbit just because I wasn't really as into them. So I didn't know that that's what happened with Ian McKellen, because I know again in Lord of the Rings he still he's 5 feet behind where they are, he did all this perspective stuff, but he was still at least in the same room. Acting with them. So I didn't know that they were
Poor guy.
I know. He said it would just be him in a room. And I'm that's heartbreaking.
For months and months.
For months and months and months, yeah. And because he's the only normal sized person in those films, because it's just him and dwarves,
Yeah,
and the Hobbit films especially.
Hobbit films especially, yeah.
It's I've been trying to reconcile my appreciation for the Lord of the Rings movies with my by the end my loathing of the Hobbit films, because by the time the third one came around, which isn't actually that bad compared to the other 2, because again stuff is happening at the very least things are in motion. But by the time you get there, I was just so tired and burned out and resentful of the 6 hours I'd already spent. With the idea of spending another only 2 hours and 20 minutes with this story that I was so tired of. And there was a window where it like burned me out on the Lord of the Rings too, because I just didn't want to go back and be reminded of all that time.
I think what I was so resentful about with The Hobbit, which is such a weird thing, is that I didn't like how it tried to be Lord of the Rings so much.
Right.
And I love Lord of the Rings, but I'm like, why is the Hobbit trying to be Lord of the Rings and pick these moments and like almost like identical moments from Lord of the Rings?
Right.
But I'm like, that's not what the Hobbit is. So I didn't understand why they're like trying to almost remake Lord of the Rings, but with dwarves.
Yeah, like throwing in a love triangle. Like I can't think of all the
like love triangles, or just even like characters being obsessed with certain things. I'm just like, oh, they're trying to make it like you're being obsessed with like the ring, and I was just like, it's not Lord of the Rings. It doesn't need to be as epic as Lord of the Rings. Don't make it Lord of the Rings. Make it The Hobbit.
Which is funny, talking about the extended versions, saying that we prefer those because you want extra story moments.
But they didn't put story moments from The Hobbit. That's the problem.
Yeah.
They expanded on it.
Yeah. And that was the weirdest part about talking to Jackson when the final Hobbit movie came out, was that he was absolutely convinced that you should watch The Hobbit first. That now he's made... Like Lucas in the prequels, he's made a 6-film cycle that starts with The Hobbit and ends with The Return of the King. And that is the way that you should watch them. And I'm sitting there with this guy who I've known casually for, 20 years going, no.
You'll never watch Lord of the Rings.
We get that far. And we did talk, we kind of talked about it, and he kind of laughed it off. But it's like, well, you don't know what you've done.
Yeah.
Not that you don't know what you're doing, but you look back on this thing that you've constructed and you don't realize that this shouldn't be here and that doesn't belong here and this should go somewhere else and this shouldn't even be on a DVD later. Like, it's just not. It's I don't mean to crap all over The Hobbit, but they're not good. And the going back to Lord of the Rings maybe 2 years later was the way I got back in. I will never look at The Hobbits again, although the extended version maybe someday when I've sufficiently distanced
10
from
years
it.
down the road.
Yeah, but what it is there are these 3 really good movies, this one solid adaptation, and then there's this other one which just demonstrates to me that he still wants to make that one. And so the other thing I got from him at the final press junket was the promise that he's not going to do it anymore. It's like, we're not going to do
the Silmarillion.
Right, because I was saying, like, this is it, right? There's no Silmarillion. You're done.
Yeah.
And he said, well, there's some stuff from the Silmarillion in the final. There are dialogue references and things like that. But he really does, like, he loves it so much that I think he will kill himself trying to find a way to make it all perfect. Mm-hmm. But by the same token, I think he knows that this is it, that there can't be any more.
Right.
And I think if he was being honest with himself, I know he didn't intend to direct. It was going to be Guillermo del Toro. He let himself be dragged back in, but I think that made him happy. I think he wanted to be the one to steer it.
I was happy when I found out it was going to be Peter Jackson, though, because I was like, again, I love Lord of the Rings so much. I'm like, of course.
You're like, this is amazing.
Why wouldn't he direct
experience that all over again with 3 new movies in this world, right?
Yeah, I was just like, I get to go through my Lord of the Rings mania again. And then I saw the first Hobbit, and I was like, oh no. And I'm like, I didn't even want to admit to myself that I didn't like it. I'm like, am I not a Lord of the Rings fan if I didn't like The Hobbit? It's the same crew. It's the same people making this movie. Yeah. And I was like, oh. I couldn't even admit it to myself for a while. And I was like, no, I don't like it. I can't pretend I do.
It's funny, like, I don't, not a big, like, Star Wars fanatic, but how you were saying, it's like, Peter Jackson said you have to watch The Hobbit first and then go to Lord of the Rings. It really sounds like episode like 4, 5, and 6.
Yeah.
Versus like 1, 2, and 3.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah. And just like, on the terms of if you're just strictly seeing them as like films, and if you forget that they're books, like The Hobbit just doesn't, the movie isn't as good as Lord of the Rings. Because like my sister came with me to see the first Lord of the Rings, Fellowship of the Ring. And she didn't read the books. She had no idea what this movie was about. Mm-hmm. And she wasn't also even like a big fantasy or sci-fi person. And when she saw the first Lord of the Rings, She loved it. She was like, this is the greatest movie ever. She didn't know there were 2 more. She was just like, why did they end it like that? She's like, I don't understand. Do they destroy the ring? And I'm like, there are 2 more movies. And she was like, oh, thank God, I loved it.
Yeah.
So, but I think if she also saw The Hobbit and she didn't like it either. But I think if you had started with The Hobbit as someone who knew nothing about any of these movies, you'd be like...
Lose more people.
Yeah, you'd be like, oh.
Yeah. Because it's interesting because Lord of the Rings does...
There's a lot of singing and...
True,
There's a 40-minute
Yeah.
scene of them eating. I'm over this movie.
But I think it really, like, Lord of the Rings really has themes that kind of extends outside of the audience that are, like, the fans of the books. You know, it's exactly the same with my sister. She's not a sci-fi kind of fantasy. She's not even really, like, a big moviegoer. And, like, I remember the Two Towers my parents had pay-per-view. And the Two Towers was on pay-per-view. And my sister and I watched it so many times that we could just sit there and, like, recite it. And there would be, like, Elvish, and my sister would just be saying it, like, as the movie was on. Because we just wanted to keep watching it. But, yeah, it really kind of expanded outside of... I think a traditional, when you have, like, a sci-fi movie, there's such a... You know, there's film festivals that are for horror and sci-fi and fantasy, right? Because there's that audience.
Well, I think because Lord of the Rings are... Because there's so many different story plots as well that everyone's going to relate to something in it.
Right. Like friendship or, like, the
romance
relationships
or
yeah.
the underdog story or...
Good versus evil. Like,
yeah.
Yeah.
Environmentalism. Like, there's so many different themes.
And you can do the homoerotic reading if you want to with Frodo and Sam, and that's simply not present in The Hobbit. I mean, I guess there's the sense that some of the hobbits are buddies. I don't think.
Yeah.
I mean, Return of the King, I'm like, Frodo and Sam, and Merry and Pippin, and then Pippin and Gandalf. Like, it's just everyone.
It is basically a very fertile realm of slash fiction happening in and around the Lord of the Rings. But it works because the performances are there. Like, you buy it because there's genuine feeling. I like that there's a gay reading that is as valid as the straight bro dwarves and hobbits thing that's going on. It's just people being... But yeah, it is possible to read an entirely different emotional motivation into virtually every character in the Fellowship, which is sort of amazing. And they all pay off in the third one. I was going to say there's some structural stuff that's necessary to make it 3 movies, and I'm still kind of weirded out that they didn't put Shelob at the end of the second film because
that's the greatest ending that you could possibly have. I mean, in the book, you're just like, what? Yeah, Frodo's dead. Like, how can you end it like that? Or like, what's going to happen? So I thought for sure they were going to end the second one with Shelob's lair,
or at least introduce, right?
Yeah.
Like, here is a giant spider. Come back next year.
Yeah.
But
then it's not until it's like honestly, I think 2 hours into the third movie that Shelob
comes in. I know it's a
in the
while.
extended it is.
Yeah. Oh well, sure.
But in the regular, the producer's cut, I'm not sure when she comes in, but it's a while.
Yeah, and ending on the battle is still pretty cool. I mean, my argument was that if they'd ended it with the beginning of the final battle, if you get Fellowship, if you make it 4 hours and you go all the way in, and you end with the final charge or with that peril point, and then just come back to finish it, you've got a roller coaster straight down to the end of the second film. If you only do 2, and I got angry faxes. That's how far back this goes. But,
well, wasn't it originally, I think it was originally supposed to be 1 movie, and then New Line was like, okay, no, let's make it 2 movies, and then I think whatever happened, Peter Jackson's like, no, we need 3 movies, it's 3 books.
Or maybe the first one came out, and they were like, studio.
No, it was 3 movies,
by the time it went into production.
But originally it was supposed to be 1, then 2.
Bob and Harvey Weinstein, when they had it, were going to do it as 2 at Miramax. I don't know who was going to direct it at the time, but it was they were talking about 2 3-hour films. And then by the time New Line picked it up, I think that's where the money came from. Like they could do it all. And it was Jackson who came up with the idea of shooting 1 continuous production. Yeah. And breaking it up into 3 films.
Because I guess that saves money, right? If you do it like that.
Yeah, you never shut down. You just keep going. I think it's 18 months and something like 180 million all in, which is incredibly cheap. Yeah. Given that I think the Hobbit movies each cost about that much by the end of it with all the CG and the frame stuff. Did you see the Hobbit in high frame rate versions, or did you just see it conventional?
I think we did. I remember seeing the first one in the high frame rate.
Yeah, I did see the first one in the high frame rate as well.
That's how they screened it for us too.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then they didn't for the other two.
Yeah.
because I think they knew.
Yeah.
Well, it just looked it looked comical.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I found like it works against the things that Jackson loves, which are those sweeping pans. It
Yeah.
flattens everything out, and all the action seemed to tilt in a weird
Right.
way.
Mm-hmm.
It was just really unpleasant. I have talked to Douglas Trumbull about the new HFR process, the one he created that was used in Billy Lynn.
Okay, I was
which
gonna
is
talk about Billy
120
Lynn.
frame,
Yeah.
which is 4 times the speed, 3 times the frame rate of The Hobbit, which was shot at 48.
Yep.
And it's still not working.
I didn't like Billy Lynn either. I was just like, what makes a movie is that it looks cinematic, and I'm like, I don't want it to look as real as it possibly can.
Right, you can see sets.
You
You can actually see that props are props and
Yeah,
things
right.
aren't real.
And you know what I thought too is that you could actually see that the actors were acting.
Yeah, in a weird way. There's some kind of the veil is missing, and I felt that in the first Hobbit when they screened it for us, was that you could see, like, yes, you can see stitching on the costumes, but that makes you aware that they're costumes.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's not dwarven stitching. It's, it's a wardrobe mistress. It's
Yeah.
somebody who's actually just repaired something.
Yeah. I think it takes you out of that movie moment or just that experience.
Yeah, there is not nearly as much effort required, I think, to enjoy the Lord of the Rings movies as there is to enjoy the Hobbit movies. Just because they're moving, there's a story. They look like, they were shot on film and they look it. That's the other thing that really struck me with Peter saying that he wants you to see the Hobbits first. It's like, why? They don't even look as good. You want to introduce someone with the grandeur of the Lord of the Rings films, where you're just, you're not digitally altering that much. New Zealand is Middle Earth.
Yeah.
It's weird and it's beautiful and it's got colors that you've never seen before in that order. And then to go in and lovely bones it up the way he did with The Hobbit, that's just not the right move.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I also love, besides for the story of Lord of the Rings, is I was obsessed with the cinematography, because I was like, I've never seen anything that looks this beautiful before, like, on screen. And at that time, I was like, I want to be a cinematographer, because I'm just like, these shots are, like, gorgeous, especially the first movie. There's so many shots that I was just like, oh my god, like, you could just turn it into, like, a painting, or it's just beautiful.
Yeah, they get a lot more frenzied. But the first film is sort of almost idyllic for at least a good hour, just before things really start rolling.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I cut you off.
No, I was just going to say there's so many traveling scenes in the Fellowship, right? That you're talking about, like, the landscape.
Not even the landscape, just, like, there's a shot when one of the Black Riders is riding towards, like, Bree, and there's, like, this light coming through, this blue light coming through the trees and the forest, and it's just, I'm like, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Yeah, they are gorgeous movies.
Yeah.
They're just, it was Andrew Lesney, right?
Yeah.
Shot them.
Yeah.
Who's just this amazing eye. But I keep pulling in my brain at images, and it is the naturalism is the thing I think that sells it, is that you are watching people be people in this world instead of a big stylized Star Wars prequels kind of reality where you just get the sense that half the stuff on screen isn't real. And even though there are big battle scenes which do kind of turn into software fighting software, which is the thing I hate the most about epic CG films, you still have the individual humans or dwarves or hobbits. You have the people to connect to in these movies. That is the thing that keeps you watching instead of just sort of mentally checking out. Whereas in The Hobbit, it's like, oh, barrels on the water for 25 minutes. And there's some people in them that I kind of care about, but I don't really. And then you have even the scene of Orlando Bloom surfing and skateboarding, whatever that is. It feels like ingenuity for a second, and it doesn't feel like pandering. It doesn't feel like, hey, you kids like this, like the old Simpsons joke, this is the thing that you enjoy to see. It's inventive, and it feels like a character moment in a way that it maybe doesn't have to. Yeah. So
I think Legolas has a moment in every single film, like in the Two Towers, how he flips backwards on that horse, and it's just like,
right.
And then him taking down the Oliphant in Return of the King by himself. Like, he always has his one really big epic
awesome elf moment.
Awesome elf moment,
Contractually obligated.
I have to be super cool at least once in all of these films.
Which is not easy when you look, like, objectively silly. The elf, that's the thing that really strikes me too. The elf makeup, I said it again, the elf makeup is goofy.
Yes.
But everyone carries it. Like, the actors pull it off. If you're going to cast Hugo Weaving and Cate Blanchett and make them look like that, they're not going to play into it. They're going to be quite dignified and regal. And I was really struck by that watching it. It's like, this I should be snickering. I should be giggling
Right.
at this. When Christopher Lee turns up, he's a very old man. And they're making wizard hands at each other, and they're doing that thing that is kind of, well, really goofy, but they are also...
Like their wizard fight?
Yeah, that's dumb. But it doesn't play dumb. By that point, you're invested in the stakes, and you know, this is actually two friends who've since betrayed each other and are dealing emotionally with that, like, because that's why you hire Ian McKellen and Christopher Lee. They're going to play it. Yeah, it was lovely, and there's nothing like that in the Hobbit movies. There's Sylvester McCoy with bird shit on his head.
Yeah.
Right.
I think that was a Guillermo idea. It feels like the one thing that survived from his idea. It's like, he should have an animal. He loves the birds. He doesn't care. I totally get that emotionally from that development stage. I didn't get to ask Jackson about it, but it's dumb. Like when you see it, it's like ew.
You're laughing like at it, right?
Yeah.
You're not laughing with him.
Yeah. And the cinematography doesn't help either.
Yeah.
You're just confronted with the fact that there is an actor with fake bird poop on his head, and nobody else is saying anything.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's where you have Aragorn. That's what's missing from the Hobbit movies is the Han Solo figure, the one who can comment on the action as it's happening, and befriend us as an audience. That's what Mortensen does so beautifully. Is he just sort of lets us into the ordinary person's story, which is he's still the best there is at what he does, but he's a guy.
Yeah.
And he's got father issues, and he's got he doesn't want to be who he is, and he's resisting his destiny, and he's the mirror for Frodo that way, but Frodo is also simple and determined and doesn't question himself. Like Sam does all the questioning for him. But yeah, none of that is in The Hobbit. So there's this hollowness. Plus, I mean, yes, they got Gollum right. Gollum looks great, is better. And Andy Serkis was the AD on the entire Hobbit shoot as a favor, which I found out on the junket too.
Oh, I didn't know.
Jackson brought him down to do Gollum, and in the process of prepping all the motion capture stuff, he ended up hiring him and said, "You want to hang around?" And he stayed and did the whole thing as the either the first assistant director or the second unit director. No, it must have been the second unit director. But he
Interesting.
handled all of it just because he's comfortable with motion capture.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
environment
I've been
stuff.
doing this basically my whole life now.
Yeah.
He's like, I'm the guy.
Yeah.
Anybody's gonna do this job.
Yeah, well, the two Planet of the Apes movies are just peeking out over there in that pile, and I'm thinking he really is the guy.
He's the guy, yeah.
And his physical stuff is great, but the voice, like all of Gollum, is terrific. Even in the original, in the first time we see him, it's the Two Towers, right? And he's not in Fellowship.
He peeks out, you see his eyes, but I don't think
Just
it's
a hint of
Andy Serkis maybe that even does
No,
that.
I remember they were saying that when the Fellowship
They didn't
came
know
out,
what
they
he was
didn't know
gonna look like,
what
right?
he was going to look like.
Yeah.
right,
Yeah.
like it wasn't rendered yet.
Yeah, so you just like
So it's just like his hands, and then he kind of leans into the light, and you see his eyes a little bit. But that's it.
But then when he's in, I mean, I remember seeing that in December 2002 and just feeling like the world had changed. Because that, we'd seen digital characters kind of, but they were Jar Jar Binksy. And
Right.
no one talks about that.
Yeah.
Like as a net positive for the industry, but the way it's used in the Two Towers as simply an element of storytelling is stunning.
I remember too, I think when it was Two Towers came out, people thought that like Andy Serkis should be nominated for an Oscar.
They were definitely trying for Return of the King. That was a big part of it. And then they tried again for the Planet of the Apes movies. And they'll try again this year, I'm sure, because he is doing stuff that like literally no one else is doing.
Yeah.
But I think the Oscars go to people look at the effect and they don't look at the person performing it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is weird.
Yeah. I think maybe they even forget that it is a person behind it doing all of that.
Yeah.
It's like, it's just a computer generated image.
Yeah. And we are at a point now, like in Pixar movies, where bits are acting in a way that they couldn't before, which is incredible. But I mean, Gollum would be very different with a different actor. Like the voice would be different, the physicality would be different, and you just have to look at other people's performances in other similar roles to realize what he did.
Yeah.
I did want to ask, because I'm fascinated that you guys made this tiny little Toronto movie for almost no money with virtually no CGI at all, and some color timing as far as I could tell.
Yeah.
And you picked
And then we
these.
picked Lord of the
The final question on the podcast is always the same, which is like, what of this film, what of the Lord of the Rings has made it into your creative DNA? Have you borrowed or stolen or lifted anything? But we can take it in now because I think it's kind of relevant. How does it influence you, or did it influence you?
I guess so. From a writing perspective, I loved the scripts as well. I mean, I love everything about Lord of the Rings, but so I loved the scripts, and one of my favorite aspects of the film were the characters and the relationships that they had. And so in my writing, that's what I'm drawn to most is characters and their relationships with each other. So I guess like that's the biggest thing that I took from Lord of the Rings is like how you love these characters so much, and you even like a lot of them are like very flawed as well, and I love flawed characters, and I like to write flawed characters, and so I think
I mean it's an interesting pick from us who we're doing almost adults because like
total opposite.
This like the Lord of the Rings, and it obviously didn't directly influence almost adults, but I think growing up on those movies, I remember watching some of the special features and watching interviews and even things in like the Fellowship. So many things in the Lord of the Rings were done practically, which I just loved about it. I loved the idea of like, how do we get this shot of all these orcs running down a cliff, and how do we actually do it with a real camera, like, rigged in the trees or whatever it was. Like, I always just thought that was so interesting, like doing it on the day and doing it, figuring out problem solving, how to capture the kind of look you want. Or like Galadriel, her eyes, they're just a bunch of Christmas lights that they put up and her eyes sparkle. Like, that's just such... She looks beautiful, and the reflection in her eyes look beautiful, and it's so simple, right? And so I really love that about it, because it kind of goes back to talking about how they feel so real a little bit too.
I think Lord of the Rings were the movies that made me wanted to get into film. Prior to that, like my favorite movies growing up were always like Disney animated movies, and at the time I wanted to be an animator for Disney. But I wasn't like a good enough drawer, basically. So I was like, well, there goes that dream. And then I saw Lord of the Rings, and I was like, I want to make movies. Like, because like just the feelings you get from watching those films. I was like,
I remember Adrianna and I, we went to the same high school together, and we started making short films in high school together. And I remember in our tech class, one of our assignments we had was learning how to use green screen. Oh. So you could pick any movie you want, like a scene from a movie, and like green screen yourself in it. And I remember, I don't know if we did it as a partners or if we had our own assignment, but I remember doing a scene from The Two Towers, where Frodo and Sam are with Faramir, and it's like when he lets them go, essentially. And I remember green screening my face and then putting my face on Frodo's face and like doing his lines, and like the compositing of the green screen was great, but like it was so bad. Like it was so bad.
We also made a short film and used the music from She Loves Lair as well.
Yeah, we'd made this film that was like a dream. The whole film was a dream, and there was this Adrianna was this character with like this scary mask on, walking in like slow motion, and we used that music. So bad.
Yeah,
but like
I honestly think that Peter Jackson would be really happy to know that he'd inspired you. I'm being deadly serious. He would be so tickled. Yeah. He's a very joyful man.
Yeah,
it's kind of weird.
I think he just is a hobbit, basically.
He kind of is. I think that's why he had to make these movies, and that's why he still defends them so much. He's a hobbit with phenomenal power.
Yeah.
Just the ability to fly Stephen Colbert down for a cameo in the Hobbit movie and just throw it away in the film. It's there, but if you don't know that's him, there's absolutely no special attention paid. That was the idea. He just wanted to be part of it.
Right.
And he made that happen. And he's this weird, generous person who just chugs away doing the things he wants to do. I mean, his Kong is... I love it. I think it's just this weird... emotional love song to the original film, and he's basically taking you by the hand and showing you all the things he loves about it, which naturally requires it to be twice as long as the original film, just because he wants to be sure you see things and restore things that were cut, that like the you guys have seen it, like the bug sequence, that whole thing that they never actually shot, but it was going to be part of it in the original film, that there was this extra valley of monsters and it just couldn't work, and so he's like, oh, I can do that, I'm gonna make that happen. His heart is so big with this stuff that he gets caught up and excited, and that's why we have 3 Hobbit movies, but it's also why we have Lord of the Rings the way it is, which is just so, I mean, that alone. And then, of course, Dead Alive and Heavenly Creatures. And have you guys seen the early?
I've seen Heavenly Creatures was the first Peter Jackson movie I saw, and I saw it in a screenwriting class when I was a freshman in college.
That's great.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I've seen Heavenly Creatures. I've seen Meet the Feebles. Is that the Muppets?
The Puppets
one.
one.
And I remember I saw that when I was younger, and it like scared me. Like I didn't like it
would,
because it was very frightening.
I mean, God, the sexuality and the violence.
Yeah.
Just the stuff that, I mean, I saw it when I was 21, and I don't think I was ready for it.
Yeah.
It was something. But I saw it with a crowd at TIFF, and it just, again.
You said it was a Midnight Madness
It was a
screening?
Midnight Madness screening in the 80s.
Those are fun, too.
Yeah, it brought the house down.
Yeah.
And then Dead Alive as well. Which I had already seen because they press screened it for us, and I still went back to see it with the midnight audience, and it was just...
This was a better experience, I think, too.
It was unlike anything else that you could get in this city, even now, because it was the Bloor at midnight, and the Bloor wasn't air-conditioned very well, and people were just sort of delirious by that point. They'd been at the festival all day, and they were slouching into this hot theater where the sound isn't very good, and it doesn't actually matter because just the images are all that really take over. And it's midnight, but it doesn't start on time. And so finally, when Dead Alive ended, it was 2 a.m. And I must have told this story on the podcast before. I came out sweaty and exhausted, and this giant hand clapped me on the shoulder, and it was Quentin Tarantino, who I'd met earlier in the day on the Reservoir Dogs junk. And he's like, "Wasn't that fucking incredible?" Just like bursting with energy. And yes, it was. All you can do is return fire. And he had behind him, he had dragged most of the cast of Reservoir Dogs. Not Keitel, but Buscemi was there, and Tom Sizemore. Who else? Chris Penn was there, and maybe that. Oh no, and Tim Roth, and they were all just so tired. And you could just see it. They'd been doing press all day, and they were dead on their feet. And he was just like he just pulled them along in his wake, and it was great. And then he went over and said hi to Peter Jackson, and the world changed. I think right there.
Wow.
But 1992 was a good year for TIFF.
Yeah.
But the range of his work, like to see him making these movies now, it's insane that he would be that guy. But at the same time, I think he's always just been that big. His vision has always been that big.
Yeah.
And I don't know what he can do next. Like, where do you go after you leave Middle Earth the second time?
Yeah.
What's left?
Yeah.
That's what I was wondering, too. What he's going to do next.
Right.
Besides for Unfinished Tales or The Silmarillion.
Oh, no. No, he promised. I'm holding him to that.
We also saw, remember, the stage musical of Lord of the Rings.
Oh, we did.
Which had nothing to do with Peter Jackson.
Right. No, that was produced... Was that launched here in Toronto?
It was launched in Toronto.
Yeah.
Because Michael Terrio was he Gollum? A stage actor? He's in there
I don't
somewhere.
remember, yeah. But we saw that as
remember.
well. We've seen everything.
How was it? I never did.
I mean, I enjoyed it.
Yeah,
I thought
it was
Shelob was
fun.
really cool. It was like each leg was somebody on like a puppeteer.
Okay. And was it like The Lion King with visible puppeteers where you could see the stuff working?
Yeah, they're visible. It was. I remember it was like the stage when they were like climbing up Mount Doom. The kind of stage would rise, and those were like the two key like art direction moments that I really have in my memory the most. But
How long was it? I mean, how much of the book did they get
I
in?
can't remember now.
Because it was one. It was
It was
a
one.
night
It
show.
was one night,
yeah,
and I feel
and
like
it
it was like
was
3
the
hours.
whole-
And all of them, yeah.
yeah, all of them.
Yeah.
Well, nobody tried to do that for The Hobbit.
Which could have, I think, probably would have been an easier play
Yeah,
than Lord of the
for sure.
Rings.
Like actually do the book.
Yeah.
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 Because it's just one journey. It's not anything crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah. I would watch. Well, maybe in a few years.
Yeah.
I'll take some time. Give myself some distance.
Yeah.
My thanks to Adrianna DiLonardo and Sarah Rotella, whose charming queer comedy Almost Adults is available as of today on VOD platforms around the world. Thanks also to Kate Parks. She knows what she did. You can find Adrianna on Twitter at AgeDiLonardo, AGEDILONARDO, and Sarah at SRotella, SROTELLA. And you can find the Lord of the Rings films on Blu-ray and DVD from Warner Home Entertainment in no end of special editions, box sets, and alternate cuts. They're also available on iTunes and Google Play, and I believe they're on Netflix too. As always, you can find me on Twitter at Norm Wilner, and elsewhere on the internet at nowtoronto.com. You can also find this podcast on Twitter at Semcast, S-E-M-Cast, and on the web at someoneelsesmovie.com. If you want to leave a review on iTunes, that would be very kind of you. It doesn't have to be a 1,000-page novel or anything, but some nice thoughts are always appreciated, and you can even mention wizards. Thanks for listening.